In the early 1990s, Transformers was really struggling as a brand. With the 1986 film having flopped, the original Generation 1 series ended with a bit of a whimper, as Hasbro and Takara desperately tried to cram new gimmicks into the line in a desperate attempt to stay relevant for the changing generations. Everything from robots that could hide in humanoid shells, micro-transformers to compete with the popularity of the Micro Machine line, and the daring idea of Transformers that couldn't transform. The Generation 2 line began in the early 1990s, reusing a lot of the original figures from the 1980s line, but it wasn't quite clicking with newer audiences, especially since the cartoon was just a repackaged version of the original 80s cartoon, and that's not even beginning to mention the toy ads. Needless to say, things were kind of in a rough spot. So, with a different consumer base, fan numbers beginning to dwindle, toy sales dropping, and competition rising with other prominent brands, what does a series need to do to stay afloat? It's simple. You go feral.
Welcome to the Beast Wars!
Hello, Doomers and Doomettes, I'm your host Dee, and today we return to the realm of the Transformers as we discuss the end of Generation 1 and how Beast Wars may have saved the franchise from proceeding on its way to oblivion. As of the past year, with the Generations line introducing more Beast Wars characters and rumors of a heavy animal-themed cast in the upcoming Rise of the Beasts film, I think we could take a look at one of the more unique periods in Transformers history, as it strongly differed from the original Transformers themes and introduced a whole new set of changes for the brand, despite some initially negative feedback from the fans. Now, before we begin, as always, if this is content you're interested in, I'd just like to humbly ask if you could like the video or even subscribe, as it really helps shape the direction of content being made, and I really appreciate all the feedback. And if you're a returning subscriber, thanks for coming back. And with that said, it's time to activate those transwarp drives and dive on in.
Do not fire, Megatron! I have a hostage! Why, so you do.
Before we can get into talking about Beast Wars, it's important to set the stage of the franchise in the early 1990s. Simply put, Transformers wasn't doing great. Toy sales were dwindling, with new gimmicks drastically attempting to gain people's attention as other, more radical 90s brands began to take center stage. Something had to be done, and fast, in order to preserve the brand so it didn't fade away. Around this time, Hasbro acquired the toy company Tonka, and along with it came a Cincinnati-based division known as Kenner, which gained some slight popularity in the 1980s after making some action figures based around an obscure space battle series probably no one has ever heard of. Because of this, Hasbro tasked Kenner and their offices in Cincinnati with the development of all their action figure brands, ranging from G.I. Joe, Batman, Star Wars, and of course, the daunting task of developing a new line of Transformers for the 1990s. In August of 1994, lead designer Chris Gross is stated to have brought up the idea of organic-based Transformers, citing the Japanese series Guyver as artistic influence. From there, the idea became to have more organic-type beast modes with an emphasis on muscles and sculpted fur, and transfer that same design language onto the robot modes. Beast masks were introduced as a gimmick to show kids that despite the animalistic and monstrous appearances, they were still intended to be robots in disguise, and the title of Beast Wars was actually inspired by the Kenner-made Terminator Future War line. So, from there, Beast Wars was able to enter development, and we had some strong familiar faces, like Optimus and Megatron. In fact, they maybe were a bit too familiar, as the original toy line seemed to imply that this new era of Transformers was set in the present day, with mankind's dabbling in genetic engineering, allowing the Cybertronian race to adapt to new, organic forms. Genetically engineered dinosaurs, I can't fathom where they got that idea at that point in time. Now, if you're thinking, hold on, that doesn't sound like the Beast Wars I know. Congratulations, you're probably in the correct timeline, because this concept of modern-day Transformers was actually tossed out the window for the TV series.
Well, that's just prime.
As most of us know, Beast Wars centers around a time-traveling plot focused on a gang of Maximals and Predacons struggling to survive on a prehistoric Earth in the events declared as the Beast Wars. The Maximals, led by Optimus Primal, were a simple exploration crew who were dragged into chasing down the renegade Predacon Megatron as well as his cohorts after they had stolen the Golden Disc taken from the real-life Voyager spacecraft. Through technology known as transwarp, they are flung into prehistoric Earth where they adopt beast forms to shield themselves from the dangerously radioactive radioactive levels of energon, the fuel necessary for Transformers. What started as a simple scuffle between two factions grew into an epic tale of sacrifice and grandiose displays as the characters gradually began to understand that their actions could have effect on the future, and the story evolved into one about protecting the original Generation 1 timeline. The thing is, this actually wasn't completely intended from the start. Let's rewind things a bit. Hasbro approached the animation studio Mainframe Entertainment to produce the then upcoming Beast Wars series. Mainframe was known for its work on one of the first CGI television series to air, Reboot, as well as the Dire Straits' Money for Nothing music video, which apparently they weren't big fans of themselves. Mainframe Entertainment then sought out the talent of Bob Forward and Larry Ditillio, both of whom originally worked on the He-Man and the Masters of the Universe series in the 1980s. Interestingly enough, when approached by Mainframe in regards to heading a new Transformers project, Forward and Ditillio both said,
and we said, Transformers, nah, not really. We weren't big Transformers fans. It came past the time that we were adolescents, for one thing, and usually your favorite cartoon shows when you're an adolescent, and it's like everything to you. We were adults, and it wasn't everything to us.
Now, let's be fair and look at this with the context of time. Both of these individuals were already working adults in the 1980s and wouldn't necessarily have an attachment to Transformers, being a mere toy line with a cartoon from that period. So really, the two of them had the monumental task of revitalizing a brand. Eventually, the two of them changed their minds, however, and decided that they would do it, but also, they would emphasize some of the more science fiction elements of Transformers. Of course, being about fighting robots, the brand has always had a bit of sci-fi, but Forward and Ditillio wanted to expand upon that, with elements of time travel, otherworldly aliens, mysterious relics, and more, despite both of their initial unfamiliarity with the brand. Now, around the development of the series, it's worth noting the general fan perception that began to arise. At this time, Transformers as a fandom was still in its infancy, and was primarily gathered around the site alt.toys.transformers, which allowed for general messaging sharing around the property. Needless to say, when introduced to radically different concepts and being told that your old favorites may not be appearing, people can tend to take poorly to that.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
Now, let's be fair, it is understandable, especially considering the attachment many have had to the original characters, but the point is, this ended up sparking a lot of debate within the Transformers community. So much so that it ended up spawning the infamous phrase, truck, not monkey, as a bit of mockery for those decrying that Optimus should, quote, be a truck, not a monkey. Apparently, this bit of concern about not being close enough to G1 even extended to Hasbro themselves, as Ditillio spoke about a Hasbro representative who advised them to simply redo G1, but that wouldn't be feasible here, especially at the technological level. While it may seem incredibly dated by today's standards, at the time, Beast Wars really paved the way for a lot of television animation projects, as there was really nothing else like it. Reboot was able to have an advantage of being set in a cyberspace setting, allowing for the general aesthetics to get away with some more polished, computerish looks, but Beast Wars featured organic characters and needed more natural movements. Essentially, it was at the point where they were pioneering new animation for television with each episode.
People falling into the water, very, very difficult to do. Fog, mist, which you can do easily in classic. You can do well in CGI, but they managed to do almost everything they told us not to do by the end of the show. And we're proud of that, and we're proud of them for doing it. They said, oh, we can push the envelope on this.
Unlike the original Generation 1 series, it was not possible to have multiple characters introduced in every single episode. As such, a lot more emphasis was instead placed on the already limited cast, giving them more moments to themselves, as well as generating conflict between each other, even when on the same side.
You know, had a limited number of characters. We couldn't just constantly be doing shows in which we were introducing somebody's cousin or something like that. So instead, we just had the characters start to bicker constantly, so they were always on edge, and that just became really dynamic, and it's something that I've, carried through ever since, is just how neat it is if the characters aren't always agreeing with each other all the time.
And this bit in and of itself could not have been done without the extraordinarily talented voice cast.
So, this is your first day on the job or what?
Shut up, Rattrap.
Oh, yes, sir. You know, I feel just heaps better knowing that our lives are in your capable hands.
We're all gonna die.
Amazing voice actors like Gary Chalk, David Kay, Scott McNeil, and many more really worked hard to give life to these new characters to the brand. That's not to say that the original G1 series didn't have good voice talent. It certainly did, but it was the way that the Beast Wars actors attached themselves to the characters that really gave them some sense of identity. From verbal tics to catchphrases, it brought out a whole new level of Transformers storytelling to simply make them feel more legitimate.
A bargaining chip should remain in play until the game is over. Yes.
Why do you always talk to yourself?
I simply have a penchant for intelligent conversation.
It then came time for the big moment of judgment, the airing of the opening two-part premiere of Beast Wars. When the premiere aired, Forward and Ditillio actually took to alt.toys.transformers to actually lurk and interact with some of the fans, answering questions or providing some behind-the-scenes detail. And they actually took the time to listen to some fan feedback. As a really big example, in the first episode, Optimus Primal makes reference to a great war.
Remember the Great War, Rattrap. If the Predacons get enough energon, they'll start it again.
Bob Forward initially just meant this to just be tidbits of potential world building to give depth to the narrative, but fans assumed that this was a reference to the original Autobot and Decepticon war.
I just meant, okay, there was this great war, and that kind of explains why the Predacons and the Maximals were constantly fighting. At that point, Larry clued me into the news groups that he found about the Alt Toys Transformers and other things that you found on the internet, and they were very excited, and they assumed that it was talking about the war between the Autobots and the Decepticons.
From here, they actually grew to welcome and accept the fact, forging forward with an identity as following the events of the original series. Old characters are referenced or even make a full-fledged return, and Forward and Ditillio both spent more time on alt.toys.transformers, accumulating in the finale of Season 2, where they actually brought on a prominent user, Ben Yee, as a fandom consultant, who was actually responsible in suggesting that the Generation 1 character Ravage be utilized for the events of the finale, and even was given credits in the end of the episode. I think what's admirable about this is both Forward and Ditillio, despite initially not having much expertise with Transformers, began to understand and respect the greater fandom, with story elements to surprise and delight them. But that being said, that also didn't mean they simply caved in to their demands and only produced what G1 fans expected. Forward and Ditillio had a vision for the series, and thoughts on how they could elevate the storytelling, and because of them, a lot of new story concepts which they introduced are now currently staples of the brand. Transwarp technology, CR chambers, stasis pods, and more were introduced as concepts that became more regularly used in Transformers. Most notably, however, Beast Wars introduced the concept of a spark, which could potentially be called as a soul for the Transformers. The idea of a spark became so important and tied to the Transformers that it practically has been used in every single story since, and was even retconned to be included in G1. The idea of a spark really separated Transformers as actual life forms, rather than just simple machines. It's what gives them their life in the story. The characters themselves grew on to be staples as well for the brand, even as Beast Wars ended. Various characters like Cheetor, Rattrap, Waspinator, and more would be seen in the IDW comics, Transformers Animated, or Cyberverse as important characters with ties to original legacy castmates. A huge portion of the Beast Wars Season 1 lineup even appeared in the final part of the War for Cybertron trilogy, Kingdom, with new ideal figures of the characters and strong rumors that the Beast Wars lineup will be continuing in the upcoming Legacy line. There's even plenty of talk about how some of these characters will be making their live-action debut in the upcoming Transformers Rise of the Beasts film, coming out in 2023. The moral of the story here, I think, is the age-old ideology of simply waiting until something is out to judge it, since you never know the influence it will have on the larger narrative. I can imagine a big concern at the time was that characters like Optimus Prime, Starscream, and Bumblebee would be lost and forgotten to time, as characters were cycled out in favor of the new. It's perfectly understandable. Instead, I think Bob Forward and Larry Ditillio instead crafted a narrative that both honored the past as well as pushed things in a new direction, which ultimately also helped the shape of future stories. I think Beast Wars was also the first time in Transformers where there was a serious, genuine push for powerful character moments and deeper story and animation. That's not to say the original G1 cartoon was bad, but let's be real, it certainly was a Saturday morning cartoon designed to sell toys in the 80s, and often returned to the status quo at the end of the episodes. Beast Wars, on the other hand, allowed for more serious character moments, and the incredible voice talent brought about by Gary Chalk, David Kay, and the rest of the cast really helped to make these characters all the more memorable. Sure, looking back now in 2022, Beast Wars can seem incredibly dated at an animation level, and maybe a little bit hard to watch, but if you haven't seen it already, I think once you get over that adjustment period, you'll find an incredibly well-written sci-fi series with new characters you'll form attachments to, and maybe even be surprised at some of the grandiose moments that the series manages to pull off. Moments of pain, regret, and suspense, with just as much moments of upbeat themes and comedy. Not every episode ends with a maximal victory, as sometimes they can suffer some pretty heavy losses, and it only helps in keeping you invested, as you know they won't just automatically win the day for being the good guys. So if you still haven't seen Beast Wars, haven't watched it in a while, or are growing nostalgic thanks to its recent reemergences, give it a shot. I hear a rumor that you may or may not be able to find episodes here on YouTube, but you'd have to have a deep knowledge of how to use a search bar for that. And if you're still not convinced, you know what the best part about Beast Wars is? You don't have to deal with the quirky human sidekick character.
Wrench?
Oh, the wrench, you imbecilic anthropoid!
Wrench?
Yes, that's that thing! Use it! Whatever.
Hey everyone, if you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. Are you a Beast Wars fan? Are the Maximals and Predacons just technically furries? Let me know in the comments. I apologize for the delay in this upload, as I unfortunately had some complications during this time, but things seem to be smoothed out for now, and everything's great. I really want to thank you all again for the massive subscriber growth and support in this channel. We've gone from 1,000 subscribers to over 7,000 since late November, and I'm really grateful for that. As always, I want to work on what you guys want to see, so if you have any suggestions for future content, feel free to let me know here, or even on the Discord server. To give you a glimpse into the upcoming content schedule, I'd like to do a return to the Land of the Lustrous and discuss the Lunarians in the next video, and potentially after that, I'd like to do a video about the world of Warhammer 40,000. As for the Did Nothing Wrong series, I've mentioned that as a 10,000 subscriber goal, if we can reach that, I would do a Griffith Did Nothing Wrong video. So that's looking over the horizon day by day. Oh dear, what have I gotten myself into? Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I can see you next time.